Welcome to part two of this interview.
People need to understand the way that financial aid works is it is a contribution number for your family.
Welcome to the Jennifer J. Hammond podcast. Jennifer is a licensed realtor, educator, speaker, and best-selling author. Jennifer's goal is to help you find your yay in every day.
So today, one of the reasons I was so excited about having you guys again, and we've talked about this before, but I always hate when people rob the equity of their house to pay for college. And so it's one of those things where when people think about a real estate show or talking about real estate, why is it so important to talk about how to pay for college? And yet this is a topic that really, really needs to be discussed.
And so I want to circle back and give you an extreme example because the incomes I talked about were, basically middle to about $100,000. So let's jack it way, way up. Let's go up to like $300,000. This family has property. It's actually a farm. They both work. They both have good assets, and they own another property that has a business inside it. So we got property, we got businesses, we got farms, we got income. Their income is around the threes. I'm not going to use the exact number because I never try to do that, but it's around that. But they have 3 kids. So with an income in the threes, you're not going to qualify for financial aid for one student. But if you have multiple students, people need to understand the way that financial aid works is it is a contribution number for your family. And so if you have one student going to school, that entire contribution number counts against the one student. If you have 2 or 3 students going to school at the same time, that contribution number gets divided by the number of students. And so if you have 2 or 3 kids going to school and your contribution number is, say, 100,000, but now it gets divided by 2, now it's 50,000. Well, if the school costs 75, you qualify for $25,000 in aid. So you have a lot of aid profile with someone that has a very high contribution number. But if you have multiple kids, it gets divided. So you still have tens of thousands of dollars sitting on the table. Like you said, you're missing out your lottery ticket because you think, oh, I make too much money. I have too much asset. And that may be nice to feel that you have a lot of income and asset. But why on earth would any of you leave tens of thousands of dollars on the table? Why would anyone do that? And so I actually had a family, it used to be a very good friend of mine. Their family did this, like, oh, we can just pay for college. We're not going to worry about it, all that kinds of stuff. They had 4 kids. It was several $100,000 when I did the math. I was absolutely shocked by just how much, because I knew which schools they went to. So doing the math, that's tens of thousands. And in this case, the guy was a executive level at different companies. So he was kind of a executive specialist. So he worked for different companies at this level. Even at that level, making a good income, hundreds of thousands of dollars across multiple kids. So even with high incomes, even with high assets, you still have to do the research and look into it, understanding what counts, what doesn't count, what schools are you looking at. Even then, if you're looking at a school that gives a lot of merit-based, I've talked about schools we call the category 1 in the book. They're the need-based ones. But in the merit-based, these are schools like Notre Dame, USC, Penn State, even UCLA works like this. And they also give significant amounts of need-based to a lot of students, but they also have significant amounts of merit-based. So you may even be costing your kid the tens of thousands of dollars that they earned by not doing this stuff. Even if you don't qualify for anything, you still need to make sure that you're going through the process to make sure that the students get what they earn, even if financially you don't qualify for anything on that standpoint. So these mistakes, understanding how this works, what it really means in terms of a college cost, and then circling back and understanding what counts, what doesn't count against you, doing the proper forms, all that stuff comes together to put it into context to make sure, okay, you understand what you might be giving up. So that's why this is so important, because when you start understanding just how much money you might be leaving on the table, it's a little bit of an incentive to make sure you do this process.
Well, and that's why I said it's a lot. I mean, it's a whole lot of money. And I think one of the things that you said in there is often people think of, just what's happening right this minute. Okay, we only have one college student going right now. The other three are, or the other two or the other one is I'll deal with that problem another day. That's a problem for another day. And again, that's part of, to me, the whole putting together your Yay team and understanding how important it is to be asking the questions early and making a plan. So often people don't make a plan. Yep. And I love like what you talked about with the rental property as well, because so often they're super excited about the rental properties and the rental properties have some great value, but again, it's only making them about $50,000 a year and they're living off of that. But that's not, again, they're filling out those forms. And it's a really painful to think about, you're missing opportunities because you just don't know, or you just don't understand fully. So,
you brought up two very good points earlier in the show. And the first one was, should I go to college? Today, I mean, you look at the universities, 55% of students going are all female. Well, it used to be male dominated. And the reason being is a lot of guys are going, well, what am I getting out of this college education? Maybe I'm better off in a trade. I mean, you look at today, our biggest shortage out there for skilled labor is in the trades. It really isn't in a lot of college areas. So they got to make a different choice. And if they do, vocational schools and anything that's a certified school qualifies by financial aid. And you have to do the same form process. So that's number one. Number two, you talked about using professionals for things. And I think as in terms of being a financial professional, there's very few of us that really understand this business. We did a presentation to a major financial firm just a couple of years ago. And it's with all the C-levels from the CEO down. And the CEO took his entire time and spent the entire hour with us, okay, listening to the whole presentation. All his VPs, all the directors, everybody was there, okay? And we did this presentation. And when we started it, we asked the question, how many of you have college age kids, high school seniors, or have sent their kids through college? At the end of it, when we showed all this information, we said, okay, how many of you now realize you well overpaid for college? Every hand went up. Now, these are guys and women that are in a profession that, you're supposed to know this stuff. Yeah. But basically, the most financial people deal with how to save for 529 plans, Coverdales, things like this, up accounts. But they don't understand what those ramifications are when it comes to financial aid. And so it's very important if you're going to work with a financial professional that they're certified or understand this stuff real well. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's critical. And it's one of those things that even for me, I came from a very poor background. And my parents didn't have financial planners or even an accountant. And so it was interesting because I came from the background of, coupons and looking for what's the deal, what's the sale. Yep. And it's funny because I really had to do a shift as I was learning about money and learning about taxes and learning about real estate. I had to do a real mind shift. And I think that's also part of the aspect that's so often overlooked is the idea that, well, and you mentioned this earlier about someone who might be making 300,000 and in the realm of 300,000, and they think, oh, well, we're not going to qualify, or, it doesn't make any sense for us to do that because we make so much money. And so first of all, think about that. You might not know all you need to know before you make a decision. So before you're certain that you don't need any, you might want to look into it, even if it's something that you find, okay, it just isn't going to apply to me. Yeah. I think that so often people, they don't even take that chance to look and see if there's anything there. Like you talked about merit or money that the kids might be owed particularly, or earned. So you say, it's important to look at all the different aspects before you decide yes or no. But so often people they rush around and I've already know. They are completely sure that they know all about it and they don't really, right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you say that because oftentimes with some of the wealthier clients that we deal with, a lot of them do have very good savings. It's not in retirement. It's not in property. They've been just squirreling money away into savings accounts, and it's not really doing anything. Well, if you look at things like runaway inflation right now, that's been going on for the past several months, when you start taking things like that into account, you're actually losing value on the money that you saved because it's just sitting there and inflation is outpacing the interest rate, the measly interest rate the bank is giving you.
Yeah.
So when you have an issue like that, what else can that money be doing for you? So let's talk about 2 quick ways you can pay for college if you have those kinds of savings.
Yeah.
So
I like that. 2 quick ways. Okay.
2 quick ways. So the first way is, okay, you have this giant piggy bank that you've saved up to be able to pay for your kids' college. Let's say you got 2 kids. And okay, when you account for everything, it's going to cost you 250 of that 4. Okay. If that's the actual price, and this is after accounting for your income and your assets and all that stuff, it's going to cost you 250 of that 4.
Okay.
The first thing we can do is just pay out of that piggy bank as we go. And when we're done, we got 150 grand left if we had 400. So that could be kind of stinky. You spent, 20 years building this up. And now it's less than half of what it was in just a few short years. It could be, 4 to 6, depending on how close your kids are in age, maybe even 8 years if they're really spread apart. So that's one way. The other way is you take that money and you invest it wisely in stuff that gives you specific types of incomes. If you're at a high income bracket, preferably incomes that aren't very taxable, which you can do, by the way. And if you do that, well, you may actually have to use student loans, because on several $100,000, it's going to kick out a few tens of thousands of dollars in this interest and dividends and things like that. And so now you have this income stream coming out. Well, have that income stream pay for the loan. It may take you a couple extra years to pay for it, but you're paying down this out of your savings that is still staying intact. So you're letting the savings do the work to pay for the college. And now you have an instance where when your kids are done, it may take a couple years, may take 2, 4, maybe even 6 years afterwards, but you still have your 400 grand and it did all the work to pay for that school the entire time.
Yeah.
You have no idea how common it is that people are just willing to just let the money go and let that savings go and never consider the idea of letting that investment do the work for them. Let the money do the work for you. It's A, you're saving the value that you might be losing in a savings account. B, you're letting this thing do the work for you rather than you trying to do it all yourself.
And so I appreciate that one so much, because of course of real estate, you can really, if you understand how to leverage money, you can put money into real estate, investing and passive income. And it absolutely drives me crazy when people are like, yeah, but it might not be safe. And again, I'm like, oh, if you make it all your decisions on fear-based, but also it goes back to education. You probably don't understand all the ins and outs. Otherwise, that probably wouldn't be the decision you're making, right?
Yeah. I mean, people would say a look at something like the stock market. Saying the stock market is dangerous is like saying it's dangerous to go to the state of Arizona.
Right.
Are there places that are dangerous? Sure. Are there places where you're in no danger at all? That's most of the place. Because if you look at the general stock market, if you're investing in some companies, the odds of some companies having any catastrophic failure is very, 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 very low. However, if you're investing in something that is high risk, the chance of losing money is pretty good. So it all depends on what you consider safe, not safe, risky, not risky. And so if you are going to the stock market and you are investing in things that are relatively stable, they are relatively safe, or you're buying property in areas that are relatively stable, relatively safe, have very consistent renters or tenants if you're getting business property, things like that, whether it's real estate, whether it's regular investing, there are good and bad places to put your money in any of the markets. The market itself, I think, is kind of unfair to call it dangerous or risky or things like that. It can be depending on where you are, just like anything else, whether it's physical or in the market, it's where you are. You can get things like bonds at a very short duration. Sorry for using the parlance word, but that means they are almost at maturity. If they're almost at maturity, the prices really don't change that much. They can, but it's very, very unlikely that they do. So they're paying a consistent interest rate and they have almost no variability in risk. So if you're talking something risky, that's almost as safe as putting it in a money market or in your savings account. Almost, caveat. But those are things that, they generate interest. They generate this extra money and people pass on them all the time because they lump them in with, being super risky. That's like saying, okay, I'm in California. Am I safer, being in a suburb in the middle of farmland, or if in some inner city where there's a gang problem? Yeah. You're in the same state, but there's 2 very different risks of where you are. So just as an example, those things are very important in terms of how to get this money to work for you.
And again, how the money is counted by the financial aid and all the different colleges. I think that that's another one that just so often is overlooked. And so let's switch gears a little bit, but because I've been bringing up this, but what are some of I know you do a presentation. So let's talk about some of the elements of your presentation. And of course, I always want to go back to some of the biggest mistakes, but what are some of the biggest mistakes, as well as what are some of the other elements that you make sure that in your presentation you help educate people about?
Well, the first thing is choose the education that is right for the student. And this is more specifically talking to a student's mindset. So if you're a parent, this is really about the education that is right for the student. So not going to legacy schools just because it's a legacy school, not going to the big college or a private college or college at all, just because you think that's the only way to get a better education and a better life. So for instance, let's say you have a kid who's a big programmer. The kid is really good at programming, really wants to work in computer programming for software development, website, any of those kinds of things. Several of those businesses are increasingly looking at certifications, not college, because their feeling is, okay, you went to college for 4 years, but your first 2 years of education are obsolete in coding by the time you get out. So we'd rather have you do a certification, be completely up to date on everything in the past 1 or 2 years of coding life, and come straight to work for us. Right. So you're a 20-year-old, you now have a 2-year certification, and this is what's actually going to be able to pay for your livelihood, and you didn't have to pay for a big college degree. So the first thing is, choose the right education. Is it a certification? Is it a VOTEC? Is it a community college? Is it a college? Is it a state school or a private school? All those things are the first consideration, because you got to understand what you're buying. A school is a business. Their product is education. So that depends heavily on what you actually consider the education as your product. So, if you're going there in any of the STEM fields, you're in pretty good situation. If you want to be an engineer, you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, there's still a lot of things that are heavily reliant on being successful that college can really give you a leg up. But there's plenty of other things increasingly where you don't necessarily need a college education. And that is especially hard for people these days to hear, because the mode has been for the past 30, 40 years, you got to go to college to be successful. Yeah. And there's a growing place where that's not so important anymore. So that's the very first thing that you got to consider, is choose the right education. The second thing is, when you choose that education, don't go where friends, boyfriends, girlfriends, family members, just because those people went there. That doesn't mean you can't go with your girlfriend or your boyfriend or your friends, but you got to make sure it's also the right school for you as a student, speaking to the students.
Right.
So if you go to a school just because your boyfriend or your girlfriend went there, but that school has nothing for you, here's the unfortunate reality. The vast, vast majority of those relationships don't last. When you deal with, boyfriends, girlfriends, friends, you got to understand, when you go to these schools, they are set up to help you build new friend groups and get out of your comfort zone and give you, your freshman year, you go to a full week of orientation before you even go into the classes. Not sure what they've been doing with that with COVID, but those are things that they are typically trying to get you to do. Classes. Yeah, virtual orientation. Meeting people. So they're trying to get you to expand your group. So within 6 months to a year, you have different friends. Sadly, most oftentimes you have a different boyfriend, girlfriend. Yep. So if you went to that school because it was right for somebody else, or they chose that they now want different friends, different boyfriend, girlfriend, sadly for you, unfortunately, if this is a situation someone else was in, well, now you're at a school that isn't right for you, and the person that you were there for is not there anymore.
And Justin brings up a good point, because legacy schools, it's only 13% of the students actually stay there. The biggest rise in cost of college is we take 5.5 to 6 years to graduate a 4-year degree. Okay. And you can actually argue, because a lot of European countries, they don't have you repeat a bunch of courses you took in high school. So they get rid of these core courses and they focus in on what degree program you're working on. So those 4-year degrees in those countries become a 3-year degree, because like Justin said, it's a business, and you have to understand it's a business. Okay. I also have to understand an interesting stat I saw the other day, because my ears are always perked up about college, is we have 1.5 million less student applicants going to college this year. Wow. 1.5 million. That's huge, right? And now all of a sudden you got all these schools that in the past wouldn't really compete, right? Because this is one of those products where they're accepting you to come. All of a sudden, you got this number of students no longer coming, and they got to put cheeks in seats. That's kind of what we look at it as, right? So if that classroom has 20 seats or 30 seats and 10 of them are empty, that school's losing money on that, right? So you got to take a look at it from a business perspective too. Gives you as the buyer, and that's what you are as a student, is gives you an opportunity to shop around. I should always apply to schools that are peers. So I'm not going to apply to Harvard and the local community college, okay? Those are not peers, all right? Most state schools, those schools like all the Ivy Leagues don't consider them peers anyway, but I want to go ahead and I want my Brown and Harvard and Stanford. I want ones that are going to look at each other the same. Same thing with like USC, Brandeis, all those schools are going to look at each other equally, right? And so you got to take a look at, I want to apply to them so they know, because they're all going to know. You're submitting test scores, you're submitting, all the stuff, the FAFSA, and the schools get to see who you're looking at, right? And so when they do that, they now know, oh, I may be their top choice based because I put them by top choice versus alphabetical. Always go alphabetical, by the way. And another little tidbit, but I now know that, so I want to make sure that I had to pair comparisons. I am shopping. I want them to know their competitors out there for them.
That's really powerful. Again, these are like golden nuggets that so often are never discussed and people never really think about. And for many of us, the other thing I want to say is just a constant is change. It's always changing. And to think 1.5 million less applicants, and I'm sure there's I want to overuse the word millions, but millions of reasons why. But I think that it's one of those that you need to, again, I love the advice of number one, pick the right school for you. And if a trade school or a certificate is better for you, make sure you're doing what is right for you, because it is a lot of time on repeating core, a curriculum in the beginning. And it is really important also that you're doing what you're going to love, because so often I think the old school thought process was just go to college. It's important to have a degree, no matter what the degree is, no matter if you never use it. And now I think it's much more about finding out what you really want to do and really focus on what is important for that. So we're down to our last 15 minutes. So I want to see, what other things do you guys make sure in your presentations that people know about when they're looking for grants for college and any kind of funding for college? I know you and I talked before about grants, but can you give any specific advice about getting grants for college?
So I think when you're talking about grants, you're talking about the outside grants from third-party organizations, right?
Yeah, I wanted to do that because we chatted so many other aspects of paying for college, but let's talk about specifically those grants from outside sources. And again, it's one of those ones where so often people don't think about these outside sources because they're just out. Again, they don't understand all the opportunities there are to get money for college.
So there's a very good point on that. And there's also a very big caution on that.
Yeah. Okay.
So the first thing to understand about the outside sources, because if you go to your counselor, you go to your teachers at school, they will always talk about you got to apply for the scholarships and all this kind of stuff. That's about 4% of college funding. Woo! It's a very, very small percentage.
Yeah.
The part with schools is over 40%. It's close to 45%.
Wow.
So depending on the year, that's where it is. So when we're talking about scholarships and grants, the ones that we say you should focus on are the ones that are merit-based, the ones that are need-based on your financial aid, those kinds of things. But let's say you're going to a state school that doesn't have a lot of need-based or merit-based, and you make too much money to get the federal assistance, because when you're talking about really low incomes, what most people don't realize is those colleges are already, for the most part, free for those families. There are already grants and scholarships for low-income families based on federal and state assistances, because that's the first level of grants that you should really be looking at is, what do you qualify from the need-based from the government and from the state? Many community colleges will say for your first year or two, if you're a local student, your education is free.
Or your tuition.
Or your tuition is free.
Make sure they always point that out. They say education. It's not true. They're talking tuition. So not room and board and all that stuff, right?
Okay,
so your tuition can be free. If you make under a certain level, you're going to qualify for enough from the Pell Grant to be able to pay for your tuition at most local colleges and most community colleges. So for those who are low income and disadvantaged, most of your state and local resources are already free. You're talking about most private schools and you're a disadvantaged student. Those schools are already free for the need-based side. So those things are the first things you should know about for all those things. When we get into schools that you may make too much to get those resources, and you're going to a school that doesn't offer need-based and not a lot of merit, like a state school, then that is where these outside scholarships can come into play, because at need-based schools, they can count those against you as a resource you have. So all you're doing is you're saving the private college money with outside scholarships. So I don't know if you want to spend months and months doing applications and essays for those kinds of things. So understanding when it is useful to use those scholarships and not is the first thing. So let's say, okay, we've done the research. We know it's going to be useful. Where do we go? So the first place you can go, there's scholarships.com, there's IFAP, there's a few different college scholarship resources out there that will help you search.
And those
them.
references are in the book. You can look them up. So.
There's an entire 20-page reference section in the back that lists out where you can search for these different types of things.
You may not consider it scholarships, but look at WUI. So there's other states that'll give in-state tuition for certain degrees, but it saves you a lot on tuition. Different
regions, you have the Western University Exchange, there's a Midwestern one, and there's an East Coast one. Different state schools in other states will give you the in-state tuition if you're studying certain subjects. So that's another, discount program you can take advantage of. When it comes to the scholarships themselves, they can come from any variety of things. So if you have a family member in a union, most unions have extra scholarships that go entirely unused because no one applies to them. So again, if it's going to be, you're going to a school that it will help you, that's several thousand or tens of thousands of dollars that can help you.
Companies too. Companies often have scholarship programs that the students or the employees can apply to. And you'd be amazed how many people just don't apply to them. That's just money left on the table.
So you're if you're working as a parent for the companies, look at the company, look at the government organization, look at the union that you may be a part of, any of those kinds of things. Look at your local city, because most cities will actually post a variety of scholarships that are available from that local city, from different charities, different businesses that are trying to sponsor kids for different things.
Fraternals too, like the Elks Club, the Masons, the Moose. They go out the Lions Club. There's a whole bunch of them out there. They all offer scholarships. My niece got all her books and stuff paid for, because my dad belonged to all those kind of organizations, and he just applied, and so few people did, and she got a lot of money and helping her out pay for education.
And so you can find them for other things. You can find them for everything of different races. If you're a specific race, they'll give you money to go to college in different places.
Redhead, left-handed.
Yep, redhead, left-handed.
There's a ton of them out there.
Different color eyes. There's a whole bunch of different ones. So, if you have a special needs, there are scholarships out there for pretty much every category.
Just make sure that the school doesn't deduct that amount that you got from an outside scholarship from the one they're going to give you already. Don't waste your time doing that. I also want to bring up something that's really important, because this is another thing that parents always run into. In our society today, we have a lot of divorcees, right? Over 55% of our parents have second marriages or not remarried. And the first thing you think about is, well, I have an ex who makes good money, maybe I don't, or maybe I make good money, my ex doesn't. Well, if they have sharing of that child, well, guess what? You're going to apply on your FAFSA form for the parent has the lowest income and least amount of assets. It's not a joint thing. Until you get to some of those big CSS schools, as we call them, some of the big schools, they'll look at that. But you could have a lot of parents, a lot of times like, well, my ex makes a lot of money, but they're not going to participate in helping at all with this kid. They're remarried, they got another family, and they're not helping at all. I'm still on my own. And those situations, you have to still put the information down that you can gather, because sometimes you're not going to get any from the ex, right? And you got to tell the school, look, I'm on my own. These assets might be out there, but it's not going to help us any.
Yeah.
So you just got to be aware that in divorce situations or sandwich families, mom and dad are living at home and you got kids. So now you got, 3 generations living in the same home. Well, again, your application is based on how many people are living in the family, in the home. So you really got to take a look at how you're doing the application process.
So I do want to loop this into one other thing that you asked for, because you asked for what do our presentations look like? Yeah. Our presentations actually look like a structured form of the conversation we've had. We start with choosing the right school, going for the right reasons, not making the mistakes on choosing schools. We talk about how the application process works, which is, the summary is, grades and test scores, and then the student's resume. What have they done? How can they write? Their special qualifications. What have they done that distinguishes them as a student? And then the financial aid process. How are they assessing you? How does it actually work? How does the cost actually work? Then we go through, as Jim did earlier, what counts and what doesn't count against you. And then how do you actually go through the process of doing these and when these things come out? So the last mistake that I really want to make sure we mention is please don't miss deadlines.
Yeah.
It sounds crazy.
It does.
It sounds great, but I can't tell you how many times we've done presentations in the second semester of someone's high school year and they're seniors and they go, how many of you guys have applied to college? And no hands go up. They never did the applications because I think they can just apply whenever.
Right.
These applications come out in August, September, October, and they usually close end of October, November, and December, depending on which one you're talking about. So, right now we're in the smack dab middle of when you can apply for college on the application side. The financial side doesn't even come out until October 1. You can't prep it. You can't do anything before that. It doesn't come out until then. After October 1, you have to do it. The sooner you do it, the better, because we look at it like an African watering hole. Every year we see these documentaries, the BBC, and you got the dramatic British voice coming on there saying, look at the rains and it fills the watering hole and the animals come from miles around to drink. And then there's the dramatic shot a few months later where there's no rains, everything's a dry, barren wasteland, there's a little puddle and there's a bunch of lions waiting around for everything. That's kind of what financial aid is like, strangely enough. It dries up. They designate how much they want to use for a given year. And after they've allocated it, if they've allocated their entire pot, you may come with a need, but it may not get filled if they've already dished it out. So you have to do the applications early. So early in October, November, don't be waiting till next year when you do your taxes because it asks for previous year's taxes. Doing it early, there's also the CSS. Look up if the school requires a CSS financial aid application. You can go to collegeboard.org and look it up on there on the CSS tab. Take a look at the list of schools that require a CSS. If it's on there, you have to do it. Don't leave money on the table by missing out on applications and missing the deadlines.
If you need to reposition your assets or you need to establish this corporation for your income property, it has to all be done before you complete that stuff. So here you are, let's say you got a senior, October 1, the form's going to come out. So you want to really get them done October, November, mid-November at the latest, financial forms, frankly. That means if I have to set up an S Corp, it's going to take me a few weeks, a month to get that set up. So I better get my butt moving on that. I have assets that are sitting around that really are retirement assets. I want to get them into some investment that is going to now prevent this visibility because it's used for a different purpose. And schools, by the way, are really good working with you. I mean, we've had great success whenever we're helping a family. We talk to the school for that family. They've actually been pretty good about it. It's the CSS, for example, really drills down into your finances and those of your family, but they're not really looking at how do I stop you from giving money. What they're looking at is how do I give you what you deserve? All right. Yeah. And so they're looking at all those things that are saying, okay, you got this assets, but it's really not something I can use. I mean, we've had people with $2.5 million in retirement assets. Doesn't count. The school doesn't care. $1 million in equity. Most of these big schools, they don't care. That's not, to us, it's a lot of money, but to them, it's like, well, that really doesn't account as much for my financial aid package. Keep in mind, like Harvard, what do they got? Over $25 billion in assets that's sitting out there, and they're getting scholarships off of this stuff. So they're really good at working with you. So don't think that they're trying to stop you that way either.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. I want to make sure before we run out of time, I want to go ahead and ask anyone in the audience, John, anyone, do you want to ask a question before we run out of time with this subject? John, I don't know if you're there. And then anyone else in the audience, if you want to raise your hand. Go ahead, John. Oh, let me turn you up. I'm sorry. I got you really quiet for some reason. Here you go. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Jennifer. Great information. Jim and Justin, I just got two questions. I've only got a 5-year-old grandson, so he's not quite ready for grants, but we are doing some planning here. But the name, for further information, and the name of your book is College Bound Strategies. And how do you spell your last name so I can look that up? And then also, what is your website again, if you don't mind sharing that? Thank you.
Sure. Last name is Duncombe. And the website is collegeboundstrategies.com.
Yeah, the website is pretty easy, collegeboundstrategies.com. And of course, they have a Facebook page too. So, but yeah, I think it's really important. And anyone else from the audience, do you guys have questions before we run out of here? because I know it's just about out of there. Okay, good. Well, I am so grateful as usual. I love that you guys are so passionate about your subject and that you are, so interested in educating. No, and it's so important that that's your passion and that you're not just, in it for the money or something, which I see sometimes with teachers, and they don't understand how important it is, because you're truly changing people's lives and family lives. So thank you guys for all that you do.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Do we get a yay?
Yes, and I was going to say,
Yay!
as we're going to end. I'm going to even have John Lee come off his mic and talk with us, as I always look for the silver lining. So I want us all to lift your voices and say yay, okay? So 3, 2, 1. Yay!
Hi, I'm Jack Canfield. You may know me as the co-author of the Chicken Soup for the Soul series. And if you want more help in getting from where you are to where you want to be, I want to encourage you to listen to the Jennifer Hammond Show.